On a completely full flight from Chicago to San Francisco, one man's bitter prejudice was about to ignite a firestorm at 35,000 feet. His name was Robert Harrison, and all he wanted was for his daughter to move one seat over. The problem: the seat was occupied by an 8-year-old black boy. Robert was prepared to delay the entire flight to call in supervisors to make the biggest scene imaginable to get his way. What he couldn't possibly imagine was that the boy's father was already on his way, and when he arrived, he wouldn't just change Robert's seat. He would detonate his entire life. This isn't just a story about karma. It's a story about the moment a man's world collapsed because of a single hateful choice. The air in Chicago O'Hare International Airport was thick with the usual symphony of chaos. The frantic clicking of rolling suitcases, the distant garbled announcements over the PA system, and the low hum of thousands of conversations blending into a single, indecipherable roar. For Robert Harrison, it was all just noise, a necessary evil on the path to his destination. He was a man who appreciated order, precision, and control, 3 things that public travel actively conspired against. "Lily, stay close," he commanded, his voice a sharp, polished instrument that he wielded with authority both in the boardroom and at home. His grip on his daughter's small hand was firm, a physical manifestation of his worldview. The world was a disorderly, often dangerous place, and it was his duty to protect his family from its unsavory elements. Lily, his 9-year-old daughter, nodded silently. She was a quiet girl with wide, observant blue eyes and a cascade of blonde hair that her father often said was the spitting image of her mother's. Unlike her father, however, Lily didn't see the world as a threat. She saw it as a gallery of wonders. The diverse faces rushing past the different languages, she could almost grasp the sheer scale of the airplanes visible through the massive terminal windows. It all fascinated her. Robert, a senior vice president of acquisitions at Sterling Cole Financial, was flying to San Francisco for the final stages of a merger that would be the crown jewel of his career. It was a deal with Zenith Innovations, a tech giant whose meteoric rise had left the rest of the industry breathless. Landing this account wasn't just a win, it was a legacy. He'd decided to bring Lily along, combining the business trip with a weekend getaway. It was a reward for her straight A's, but also in a way a lesson. He wanted her to see what success looked like, to understand the world he was building for her. Flight to San Francisco is now boarding Zone 2. A voice chirped from the gate agent's desk. "That's us," Robert said, straightening his tie. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit, even for the flight. Appearance was everything. It was the first line of defense and the first projection of power. He led Lily into the priority boarding lane, his expensive leather briefcase bumping softly against his leg. They found their seats with practiced efficiency, 14B and 14C. Robert stowed their carry-ons in the overhead compartment, a flicker of irritation crossing his face as he had to rearrange a haphazardly placed backpack. He then settled into the aisle seat 14C and buckled Lily into the middle seat beside him. The window seat 14A was still empty. Lily immediately pressed her face to the window, peering past the empty seat to watch the ground crew scurrying around the aircraft like ants. Robert pulled out his tablet, his mind already shifting to quarterly projections and synergy reports. The Zenith deal was all-consuming. His boss, Michael Sterling himself, had made it clear. "Don't just close this, Robert. Impress them. Their CEO, Marcus Vance, is a new breed, sharp, progressive, and he values character as much as capital." Robert had scoffed internally at the progressive part. Business was business. It was about numbers, not feelings. Marcus Vance was by all accounts a genius, having built his empire from the ground up. But in Robert's world, you showed respect by showing strength and results, not by catering to the latest corporate buzzwords. The rest of the passengers began to trickle in a slow-moving river of humanity. A young couple, a harried-looking businessman, a family with a crying baby. Robert tuned them all out. He was in his bubble, a private club, with a membership of one occasionally extending a guest pass to his daughter. Then a young boy, no older than Lily, stopped at their row. He was holding a boarding pass in one hand and a small backpack with a cartoon character on it in the other. He was a handsome kid with bright, curious eyes and neatly braided hair. He was also black. The boy looked at the seat number, then at the empty seat by the window, 14A, and then looked at Robert. "Excuse me, sir. I think that's my seat." Robert's eyes did a slow, deliberate scan of the boy from his sneakers up to his face. A subtle tightening appeared around his jaw. It was almost imperceptible, a micro-expression that betrayed a deep-seated programming. He didn't see a child. He saw a category, an intrusion. "Show me your boarding pass," Robert said, his tone devoid of any warmth. The boy, slightly intimidated, held it out. Robert glanced at it. Seat 14A. It was correct. He nodded curtly, his gaze flicking toward the back of the plane, as if searching for the boy's keeper. He made no move to get up. "Well?" Robert prompted, his voice laced with impatience. "Are you getting in, or just standing there?" The boy, whose name was Jaden, shuffled awkwardly. He was small and would have to climb over Robert or Lily. Lily, sensing his hesitation, offered a small, shy smile. "You can go in front of me," she whispered, starting to unbuckle her seatbelt. "No," Robert said sharply, placing a hand on Lily's arm. "You stay put." He turned his cold gaze back to Jaden. "Go on, kid. Squeeze through." Jaden looked from the imposing man to the small gap in front of him. He mumbled a quiet sorry and began to clamber awkwardly over Robert's outstretched legs, his backpack bumping Robert's knee. Robert let out an exaggerated sigh of annoyance, pulling his leg away, as if the brief contact had soiled his suit trousers. Jaden finally made it to the window seat, settling in and quickly buckling himself up. He looked small in the large airplane seat. He glanced over at Lily and gave a tentative smile, which she returned. For a moment, they were just two kids about to share an adventure in the sky. But Robert Harrison saw something else enterly. He looked at his daughter, blonde and pale, and then at the boy beside her. A feeling of profound unease, a sour and irrational anger began to churn in his stomach. It was an old, ugly feeling he'd been taught long ago, a prejudice he wore as comfortably as his expensive watch, and he was not going to tolerate this arrangement, not for 5 hours, not for 5 minutes. He unbuckled his seatbelt with a decisive click. The battle for seat 14A had just begun. The click of Robert's seatbelt echoed in the small space with an air of finality. He leaned forward, his polished shoe tapping impatiently on the carpeted floor, and scanned the aisle for a flight attendant. He spotted one a few rows ahead, a woman with a professional if slightly weary smile, helping a passenger with their luggage. Her name tag read, Sarah. Robert raised his hand, not in a polite gesture, but with the crisp, demanding flick of a man accustomed to summoning service. "Excuse me, miss." Sarah finished her task and made her way toward him, her smile firmly in place. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" "There's been a mistake." Robert began, his voice low, but carrying a distinct edge of authority. He gestured with his head, a deliberately dismissive motion toward the space between Lily and the window. I need this seating situation rectified immediately. Sarah's eyes followed his gesture. She saw a young girl and a young boy sitting next to each other. They were both quiet, looking straight ahead. A mistake, sir. Are you not in your assigned seats? We are, Robert clipped. But this arrangement is unacceptable. My daughter will not be sitting here. He said the word arrangement as if it were something foul. Sarah's professional smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She'd been flying for 12 years and had developed a sixth sense for this kind of trouble. She chose her words carefully. I'm sorry, sir. I'm not sure I understand the issue. Is there a problem with the seat itself? The issue, Robert said, leaning in and lowering his voice to a conspiratorial, condescending whisper, is that my daughter is uncomfortable. I want her moved, or I want him moved. He didn't even look at Jaden, referring to him as if he were a piece of misplaced luggage. Jaden, though, trying to appear engrossed in the safety card in the seat pocket, heard every word. His shoulders slumped slightly, and he shrank into his seat, trying to make himself smaller, invisible. Lily shot him a quick, apologetic look, her cheeks flushing with a vicarious shame she was too young to fully comprehend, but felt in her gut. She knew her father was being mean, and it twisted a knot of anxiety inside her. Sarah's training kicked in. De-escalate. Be firm. Follow policy. Sir, this is a completely full flight. Every seat is assigned and occupied. I'm afraid I can't move anyone without a compelling safety or security reason. My daughter's comfort is a compelling reason, Robert retorted, his voice rising in volume. A few nearby passengers began to shift in their seats, their conversations tapering off as they tuned into the unfolding drama. I paid for these tickets. I expect a certain standard of service, and that includes not having my family subjected to unsuitable company. The coded language was as clear as glass. Sarah's expression hardened. The weary professionalism was now overlaid with a cool resolve. Sir, the other passenger has a valid ticket for that seat. He has every right to be there, unless he is bothering your daughter in some way. There is nothing I can do. He is bothering her, Robert insisted, his voice now loud enough to turn heads several rows away. His presence is the bother. Look, I don't want to make a scene here, but I am not going to have my 9-year-old daughter sit for 5 hours next to a boy like that with no parent in sight. It's a matter of safety. The no parent in sight was a new angle, a desperate attempt to frame his prejudice as parental concern. Lily shrank further under the weight of the lie. The boy wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting there existing. Sarah's patience was wearing thin. His parent is on the aircraft, sir. He's a registered unaccompanied minor for the boarding process, but his father is seated elsewhere on the plane. He checked in with the gate agent. Everything is perfectly in order. I don't care. Robert snapped, his carefully constructed veneer of civility cracking to reveal the raw ugliness beneath. I want you to find this boy another seat. Now. An older woman in the row across the aisle, who had been watching with a disapproving frown, leaned over. For heaven's sake, leave the poor child alone. He hasn't done a thing. Robert shot her a withering glare. This doesn't concern you. Mind your own business. He turned back to Sarah, his face reddening. He was losing control and he hated it. Is it your policy to ignore the legitimate concerns of your paying customers? I want to speak to your purser, your supervisor, whoever is in charge. This was the classic escalation tactic of the entitled. Sarah had seen it 100 times. But the context of this one, the blatant targeted prejudice against a silent child, made her stomach clench with anger. Sir, I can assure you my supervisor will tell you the exact same thing. Airline policy and, frankly, federal regulations prevent me from reseating a passenger based on their race." She said the word race, deliberately pulling it out from behind the curtain of his coded language and placing it squarely in the middle of the aisle for everyone to see. The air grew thick. The word hung there, stark and undeniable. Robert recoiled, as if struck. "How dare you?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You're twisting my words. This has nothing to do with race. This is about my daughter's comfort and safety, and I am amazed at the incompetence and disrespect I am being shown. I will be filing a formal complaint against you personally." He leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms in a gesture of finality. He believed he had won. He had invoked the holy trinity of the disgruntled traveler, a demand, a threat to escalate, and a promise to complain. In his experience, this was usually enough to make service employees fold. But Sarah didn't move. She stood her ground, her jaw set. "You are welcome to do that, sir. But for now, I need you to please buckle your seatbelt. We are preparing for departure. The boy is staying in his assigned seat." The finality in her tone was unmistakable. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. For Robert Harrison, a man who gave orders, being on the receiving end was a profound insult. The passengers around him were now openly staring, their expressions ranging from pity for the two children to outright disgust for him. The whispers started little barbs of judgment he could feel prickling his skin. He felt a small tug on his sleeve. It was Lily. Her eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "Daddy, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's okay. I don't mind. Please just sit down." Her plea, born of pure embarrassment and a child's desperate wish for conflict to cease, only fueled his righteous indignation. He saw it not as a request for peace, but as proof that she was distressed. He was doing this for her. "No, Lily, it's not okay," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "A man has to stand up for what's right." He looked past Sarah down the aisle toward the cockpit. "This plane is not taking off until this is resolved." Robert's declaration hung in the recycled air of the cabin, like a threat. It was a line in the sand, a challenge not just to the flight attendant, but to the entire operational structure of the airline. He was holding the flight hostage to his prejudice. Sarah took a deep breath, her training overriding her personal fury. "Sir, if you continue to refuse to comply with a crew member's instructions, you will be in violation of FAA regulations. I am asking you one more time to please take your seat and fasten your seatbelt." "And I am telling you I will not," Robert said, his voice cold and steady. He was now performing for the audience he had created. "Not until you do your job and address my valid security concern." The standoff was absolute. The forward momentum of the boarding process had ground to a halt. The low hum of the cabin was replaced by an uneasy silence, punctuated by the occasional fussy cry of a baby and the rustle of passengers craning their necks. Jaden had pulled a small notebook and a pen from his backpack and was pretending to draw, his head bent low. But his hand was shaking and the pen wasn't moving. He was trying to build a wall around himself to block out the man's angry voice and the weight of all the staring eyes. Beside him, Lily had buried her face in her hands, her small shoulders shaking. This was a nightmare. She had been so excited for the trip, and now her father had turned their row into a spectacle of shame. Sarah knew she had reached the end of her authority. She gave Robert one last hard look. "Stay right there," she commanded, before turning on her heel and marching swiftly toward the front of the plane. Robert watched her go with a smirk. He thought he was winning. He believed she was off to get her supervisor, who would surely see the logic in his position, if only to appease him and get the plane moving. He was a platinum status flyer, a man of importance. They wouldn't risk alienating a customer like him over something so trivial. A few minutes later, the captain's voice came over the intercom, but it lacked the usual friendly, folksy tone. It was clipped and serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Miller. We are experiencing a slight delay due to a passenger issue. We ask for your patience as we resolve it. Flight attendants, please halt departure preparations." The words "passenger issue" sent a ripple of groans and angry mutters through the cabin. Everyone knew exactly who the issue was. The glares directed at Robert intensified. He remained impassive, a stony-faced statue of self-righteousness. Sarah returned, but she was not alone. With her was the lead flight attendant, or purser, a stern-looking man in his 50s named David. He approached Robert's row with an expression that brooked no argument. "Sir," David began, his voice a low, authoritative baritone. "I'm David, the purser on this flight. Sarah has explained the situation. I need to be very clear with you. There are no other seats on this aircraft. This child has a ticket and is in his correct seat. You are causing a disturbance and delaying this flight. You have two options. You can sit down. Fasten your seatbelt and allow us to depart, or you and your daughter can be escorted off this plane." The threat was blunt and unambiguous. For a moment, a flicker of doubt crossed Robert's face. Being removed from the flight would be a logistical nightmare and a profound humiliation. But his pride, that stubborn, ugly core of him, wouldn't allow him to back down. To retreat now would be to admit he was wrong, and Robert Harrison was never wrong. "You would remove a father and his daughter because I've raised a concern about her welfare," he blustered, trying to frame himself as the victim. "Is that what this airline has come to?" "Unbelievable. I'll take my chances with your corporate office, thank you very much. This is a lawsuit waiting to happen." David's eyes narrowed. "Sir, it won't be a lawsuit. It will be a meeting with airport security and potentially federal agents for interfering with a flight crew. This is your final warning." The tension in the cabin was now a palpable thing. People had their phones out, though they were trying to be discreet. They were recording. The story of the angry man yelling about a little boy was about to have a digital life. Just as Robert opened his mouth to deliver what was sure to be another defiant retort, a new voice cut through the charged atmosphere. It was calm, measured, and carried an effortless authority that made everyone, including the flight crew, turn to look. "Is there a problem here?" The man who spoke was standing at the end of their row. He had come from the first-class cabin. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey suit that was clearly bespoke with a crisp white shirt and no tie. He was handsome, with intelligent, discerning eyes, and a presence that seemed to quiet the air around him. He was also black. He looked at the flight attendants, then at Robert, and then his gaze softened as it fell upon the small boy in the window seat. "Jaden, you okay, son?" he asked, his voice a warm counterpoint to the icy tension. Jaden looked up, his face a mixture of relief and distress. "Dad," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "This man, he's mad that I'm sitting here." The man's eyes slowly moved from his son to Robert. There was no anger in his expression, only a quiet, penetrating assessment. He took in Robert's expensive suit, his defiant posture, his sneering face. He seemed to understand the entire situation in an instant. Robert, still puffed up with his own importance, looked this newcomer up and down with disdain. He assumed he was just another interfering passenger. "This is a private family matter," Robert snapped at the man, "and a discussion with the flight crew. It has nothing to do with you." The man Jaden's father simply ignored him. He addressed the purser David. "My apologies for the trouble my son seems to have inadvertently caused. I am Marcus Vance. Jaden is my son. I was in seat 2A. I came back to check on him before takeoff and walked into this." He gestured vaguely at the scene. His calmness was disarming. He wasn't yelling or making threats. He was observing. David the purser, recognizing a potential ally in de-escalation, responded respectfully. "Mr. Vance, your son has caused no trouble at all. I can assure you of that. This gentleman," he nodded toward Robert, "has an issue with the seating arrangement." Robert couldn't help himself. He saw an opportunity to plead his case to someone who, unlike the incompetent flight crew, might understand. "An issue is putting it mildly," Robert said, addressing Marcus directly, man to man. "I've simply stated that I am not comfortable with my young daughter sitting next to an unaccompanied boy for a long flight. It's common sense. Any responsible father would feel the same way." Marcus Vance's eyes remained fixed on Robert. The quiet assessment continued. There was a long, heavy pause. "Is that so?" Marcus said, his voice dangerously soft. "You're concerned about your daughter's safety." "Of course," Robert said, nodding. "Any father would be." "I see," Marcus said slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He looked past Robert, his eyes locking with the purser's again. "The flight is full, you said." "Completely, Mr. Vance," David confirmed. "Then I have a proposal," Marcus said, his gaze returning to Robert, and this time there was a glint of something cold and sharp in his eyes. "To resolve this safety issue and allow the other 180 passengers to get on their way. I will take my son's seat, and he will take mine in first class. It's a simple switch." He then looked at Robert. "That should resolve your concerns, shouldn't it? She will be sitting next to me. A parent, a responsible father." The offer was both incredibly generous and a subtle, crushing rebuke. It solved Robert's stated problem so perfectly that it exposed the lie at its heart. The issue was never about an unaccompanied minor. Robert was cornered. His bluff had been called in the most public way possible. If he agreed, he'd be sitting next to the very man whose son he had just tried to have removed. If he refused, he would be admitting in front of everyone that his objection wasn't about a parent being present, it was about race. The trap was elegant, and it was steel. The silence that followed Marcus Vance's proposal was thick with anticipation. Every passenger within earshot leaned in, waiting to see how the cornered rat would react. The choice was simple, yet for Robert Harrison, it was impossible. His mind raced, searching for an exit, a way to spin this, but every path led to a cliff. He stared at Marcus Vance, a man who radiated a quiet confidence and power that Robert, for all his bluster, could only imitate. He saw the intelligence in Marcus's eyes, the way he carried himself, the quality of his suit. This was not the kind of man Robert expected to be the father of the boy in 14A. His prejudices had painted a different picture, one that was now being shredded before his eyes. Well, Robert stammered, his bravado finally cracking. That's not the point. The point is the principle of the thing. The airline should have handled this. It was a weak deflection, and everyone knew it. Marcus's expression didn't change. The airline staff was handling it perfectly. They were upholding policy and decency. You were the one who refused their solution. I'm offering you another one, a solution that meets your stated criteria. So what's your answer, yes or no? Do you want to get this plane off the ground, or would you prefer to continue this debate? The purser. David seized the opportunity. That is an exceptionally generous offer, Mr. Vance. It would indeed solve the problem. He looked pointedly at Robert. Sir. All eyes were on Robert. He felt a hot flush of sweat on his neck. He looked at Lily, who was peering up at him with pleading, tear-filled eyes. He looked at the disapproving faces of the other passengers. He looked at the flight crew, their expressions like stone. He was beaten. With a deep, shuddering sigh of resentment, he gave a short, jerky nod. Fine. He spat out the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. Whatever. Just get it over with. A collective sigh of relief went through the cabin. Marcus gave a small, appreciative nod to the flight crew. Thank you for your patience. He then leaned in and spoke softly to his son. Hey, champ. We're going to switch seats. You get to go sit up front. There's a big TV and they'll bring you all the orange juice you want. Jaden's eyes, which had been downcast and fearful, lit up. Really? First class. Really? Marcus said, ruffling his hair. Go on now. Seat 2A. Just tell the attendant Susan that I sent you. Be good. Jaden quickly gathered his notebook, gave Lily a small, shy wave, and squeezed past his father into the aisle. As he walked toward the front of the plane, a few passengers gave him encouraging smiles. The older woman across the aisle reached out and gently patted his arm. You're a very polite young man, she said kindly. Now it was Marcus's turn. He looked at Robert. If you'll excuse me. Robert, seething with a silent, impotent rage, stood up stiffly and moved into the aisle to let him pass. Marcus slid into the window seat, 14A, with an easy grace. The space suddenly felt smaller, charged with a new and uncomfortable energy. Robert sat back down in 14C, leaving the empty middle seat, 14B, as a sort of no-man's land between them. Lily, move over, Robert ordered, his voice tight. Lily unbuckled and scrambled into the middle seat, now sandwiched between her fuming father and the calm, silent stranger. She kept her head down, staring intently at her own hands, folded in her lap. The purser gave a final nod. Thank you, Mr. Vance. We appreciate your help. He then turned to the rest of the cabin and announced, Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for departure. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin. The normal sounds of the airplane whirred back to life. The engines began to whine. The plane pushed back from the gate. Robert stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tight he felt a pain in his teeth. He had been publicly humiliated, outmaneuvered by a man he had instantly, baselessly dismissed. The 5-hour flight to San Francisco now stretched before him like a prison sentence. For a long while there was only the sound of the engines. The plane taxied, took its place in line, and then thundered down the runway, lifting into the gray Chicago sky. Once they reached cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Robert pulled out his tablet, determined to ignore the man beside him, to retreat into the safe, sterile world of spreadsheets and profit margins. He was reviewing the final presentation for the Zenith Innovations merger. His company, Sterling Coal, was the smaller fish, and this acquisition was everything. His entire bonus, his next promotion, his reputation. It was all riding on this deal. The name of Zenith's CEO was on half the documents, Marcus Vance. He hadn't made the connection. The name was common enough, and his mind had been so clouded by prejudice that he hadn't even processed it when the man introduced himself. He was just Jaden's father. Marcus, who had been quietly looking out the window, turned his head slightly. His voice was low, casual, but it cut through Robert's concentration like a knife. Sterling Coal Financial, isn't it? Robert froze. His fingers hovered over the tablet screen. He turned his head slowly, his heart beginning to pound a strange, heavy rhythm against his ribs. "I'm sorry." "The logo on your briefcase," Marcus said, nodding toward the bag at Robert's feet. "I recognize it. You work for Sterling Cole." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Robert said, his throat suddenly dry. "I'm a senior vice president." He said it with a reflexive pride that now felt hollow. "I see," Marcus said, his gaze unreadable. "You must be flying in for the merger talks. Big week for you guys." A cold dread, colder than the air, streaming from the vent above him, began to snake its way up Robert's spine. The pieces were starting to click into place, forming a picture of such catastrophic horror that his mind refused to accept it. It couldn't be. "Yes, the Zenith deal," Robert managed to say. "Final negotiations." Marcus nodded slowly. He extended a hand across the empty middle seat. His expression was placid, almost detached, but his eyes held the weight of the entire world. "Well, in that case, I suppose we should have been properly introduced by now," he said, his voice as smooth and unforgiving as polished granite. "I'm Marcus Vance, founder and CEO of Zenith Innovations." The world stopped. The hum of the engines, the chatter of passengers, the clinking of the drink cart down the aisle. It all faded into a deafening roar in Robert's ears. He stared at the outstretched hand, then up at the face of the man. He had insulted the father of the child. He had demeaned the powerful CEO, whose company he was desperately trying to woo. He was not just sitting next to a man he had wronged. He was sitting next to the man who held his entire professional future in the palm of his hand, and he had just spent the last hour showing him in the most vivid and ugly way possible exactly what kind of man he was. The blood drained from Robert's face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The tablet slipped from his numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. The shock was so profound, so absolute, it felt like the plane had just dropped 10,000 feet. The clatter of the tablet on the floor was the only sound in their small, suffocating row. Lily jumped at the noise, her wide eyes darting from her father's ashen face to the calm, waiting expression of Marcus Vance. She didn't understand the names or the companies, but she understood the shift in Wawa. The atmosphere had changed from tense to something far heavier, something akin to doom. Robert Harrison, the man of control and command, was utterly broken. His carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of arrogance and entitlement, had been leveled by a single devastating sentence. He stared at Marcus Vance's outstretched hand as if it were a venomous snake. Shaking it felt like an admission of guilt, an act of surrender. Not shaking it was an impossible breach of protocol. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, Robert slowly, mechanically raised his own hand. It was trembling. His palm was slick with a cold sweat. When his fingers touched Marcus's, the grip he received was firm, dry, and brief. It was the handshake of a man sealing a coffin. "Mr. Vance." Robert breathed the name barely a whisper. His mind was a maelstrom of panic. He was trying to calculate the damage, to formulate a response, an apology, some desperate gambit to salvage the unsalvageable. But his thoughts were sludge. All he could see was the condescending sneer on his own face back at the gate, hear the ugly words spilling from his own mouth. Marcus withdrew his hand and leaned back in his seat, his gaze returning to the window as if he were merely commenting on the cloud formations. "Beautiful day to fly," he said, his tone conversational, almost breezy. The casualness was the most brutal form of torture. It denied Robert the confrontation he both craved and dreaded. There was no shouting, no lecture, no immediate declaration of consequences. There was only the quiet, suffocating knowledge of what he had done and the terrifying uncertainty of what would happen next. Robert finally found his voice, though it was a strained, hollow version of its former self. "Mr. Vance, I had no idea. I am so sorry. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." Marcus turned his head slightly, his eyes still on the horizon. "A misunderstanding?" He repeated the word, hanging in the air. "No, I don't think so. I think I understood you perfectly, Mr. Harrison. You made your position quite clear." "No, you don't understand," Robert pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. He was starting to babble the words, tumbling out in a frantic, disorganized mess. "I'm a father. I was just concerned, overprotective. You have a son, you must know what it's like. The world is, you worry." "I do know what it's like," Marcus said, and now he did turn to face Robert fully. The placid mask was gone, replaced by an expression of profound, soul-wearying disappointment. It was infinitely worse than anger. "I worry about my son all the time. I worry about the grades he gets. I worry about him being kind to others. I worry about him scraping his knee when he plays basketball." He paused, his gaze hardening. "And yes, Mr. Harrison, I worry about him meeting men like you. Men who will look at his skin and decide he is unsuitable company before he's even had a chance to say hello. Men who will try to make him feel small, to make him feel unworthy of the seat he is sitting in, not just on an airplane, but at any table he earns a place at. So yes, I understand your concern far better than you can imagine." Each word was a precision strike, dismantling Robert's pathetic excuses and exposing the raw prejudice beneath. Robert felt stripped bare, his shame, a physical weight pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. "It wasn't. I'm not a racist," he whispered, the denial sounding feeble even to his own ears. Marcus let out a short, mirthless laugh. "Men like you never are," he said, turning back to the window. "It's always something else. Concern, comfort, culture. It's never about race, is it? It's just a remarkable coincidence that your concerns always seem to manifest when the person in question looks like my son." He said nothing more. For the rest of the flight, Marcus Vance did not speak to Robert again. He put on a pair of noise-cancelling headphones and opened a sleek, ultra-thin laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was working, building his empire, while the man who had insulted him sat stewing in a toxic brew of fear and humiliation. The flight was a 4-hour ordeal of silent agony for Robert. He couldn't work. The figures on his tablet swam before his eyes, mocking him. Every number, every chart was tied to the Zenith deal. The deal he had almost certainly just destroyed. He tried to think of a way out. Could he call his boss Michael Sterling and get ahead of it? What would he even say? "I publicly harassed our target, CEO's 8-year-old son, because he's black"? The drink cart came by. Robert ordered a Scotch neat, then another. The alcohol did nothing to numb the dread. It only sharpened the edges of his self-loathing. He glanced at Lily. She had fallen asleep, her head resting on the armrest of the middle seat, as far away from him as she could get. Her face, even in sleep, looked troubled. He saw her not just as his daughter, but as a witness. She had seen him at his absolute ugliest. What lesson had he taught her today? Not about success, but about hate. The thought was a fresh stab of guilt. He had prided himself on protecting her, but he had only exposed her to the most poisonous part of himself. The hours crawled by. Each minute was a tick of the clock on his career's execution. When the captain finally announced their initial descent into San Francisco, a fresh wave of panic washed over Robert. The flight was ending. The bubble was about to burst. The real world, with its real consequences, was waiting for him on the ground. As the plane taxied to the gate, Marcus closed his laptop, took off his headphones, and stowed them in his bag. He did it all with a calm, unhurried deliberation. He did not look at Robert. When the seatbelt sign switched off, Marcus stood, retrieved his bag from the overhead compartment, and then paused. He looked down at the still sleeping Lily. For a moment, his harsh expression softened. He then looked at Robert, his eyes like chips of ice. "Enjoy your weekend in San Francisco, Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. And with that, he turned and made his way toward the front of the plane to retrieve his son disappearing into the crowd of deplaning passengers. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a promise. It was a dismissal. Robert Harrison, Senior Vice President, had been dismissed. He sank back into his seat, his body feeling heavy and useless. He was the last one to get up. He woke Lily gently, and as they walked down the jet bridge into the bright, bustling terminal of SFO, his phone, which had been on airplane mode, buzzed back to life. It began to vibrate uncontrollably in his hand, a frantic, angry buzzing. The screen lit up with a deluge of notifications. 14. Missed calls from Michael Sterling. 8. Missed calls from office. 23 new text messages. 47 new emails. The digital avalanche was just the beginning. The real one was about to bury him. The phone felt like a live grenade in Robert's hand. The sheer volume of notifications was terrifying. Michael Sterling, the founder and senior partner of Sterling Cole, was a man who communicated with terse, efficient emails. 14 missed calls from him signaled a catastrophe of biblical proportions. With a trembling finger, Robert tapped on the first text message from his boss. It was a single all-caps word sent an hour ago, "Call me." The subsequent texts grew progressively more frantic. Robert. "Call me now. Where the hell are you? Answer your damn phone." Vance called me. That last message hit Robert like a physical blow. Vance called me. It had happened. The axe had fallen while he was still in the air, helpless. He found a relatively quiet corner of the bustling arrivals hall, telling a confused Lily to wait here for just a minute, sweetie. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely dial the number. He took a deep breath, trying to summon some remnant of his old confident self. But it was gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening fear. Michael Sterling picked up on the first ring. He didn't say hello. "Robert?" Sterling's voice was a low, dangerous growl, a sound Robert had only heard directed at the most junior, incompetent analysts. "What did you do?" "Michael, I can explain." Robert began, his voice raspy. "It was a misunderstanding. The whole thing got blown completely out of proportion." "Blown out of proportion?" Sterling's voice rose to a near shout, laced with disbelief. "I just got off the phone with Marcus Vance. The Marcus Vance. Do you know what he told me, Robert? He told me he was cancelling the final merger meeting. He told me that under no circumstances would Zenith Innovations ever do business with a company that employs a man like you. He didn't just walk away from the deal, Robert. He torched it. He salted the earth. He said, and I quote, "The character of a company is reflected in its people, and frankly, I am disgusted by the character you employ." Robert's legs felt weak. He leaned against the wall for support. "Michael, he's misrepresenting what happened. I was just looking out for my daughter. Looking out for your daughter." Sterling scoffed a bitter, humorless sound. By harassing his 8-year-old son, by causing a scene that required the captain's intervention, by delaying a flight full of people, many of whom I've since learned from the airline filmed the entire incident. Marcus told me to check social media in about an hour if I wanted to see the Sterling Cole brand go up in flames. Social media. The thought hadn't even occurred to him. The passengers with their phones. They weren't just taking videos for themselves. They were feeding a story to the ravenous maw of the internet. His face, his daughter's face, his hateful words, they were about to become public property. "This isn't just about the Zenith deal anymore, you fool." Sterling continued, his voice dropping back to that icy, lethal tone. "This is about damage control. This is about our firm's reputation, a reputation you have single-handedly dragged through the gutter. Do you have any idea the kind of firestorm this is going to cause? We have diversity and inclusion clauses in our contracts. We have shareholders to answer to. We have a brand image that we've spent 50 years building." "I can fix this," Robert pleaded, the desperation raw in his throat. "I'll call him. I'll write a letter. I'll apologize publicly if I have to." "You will do nothing," Sterling commanded. "You are not to contact Vance. You are not to speak on behalf of this company. You are not to do anything other than get on the next flight back to Chicago. Your access to the company network has been suspended. HR will be in touch with you tomorrow morning regarding the immediate termination of your employment." The words hit with the force of a physical impact. Termination of your employment. The crown jewel of his career had become his tombstone. The legacy he wanted to show his daughter was a legacy of public disgrace. "Michael, you can't," Robert whispered. 20 years. I've given this company 20 years of my life. And you've undone it all in a single afternoon," Sterling replied, his voice cold and final. "You are a liability, Robert. A walking, talking, racist liability. And I am cutting you loose before you sink the whole damn ship. Don't come to the office. Box up your personal effects at home. We'll send a courier. Goodbye." The line went dead. Robert stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the dial tone. It was over. His career, his reputation, his future. All of it gone. Decimated by an arrogance so profound, he hadn't even recognized it as a flaw. He had always seen it as a strength. He slowly lowered the phone, his eyes finding Lily. She was watching him, her small face etched with worry. She had seen the confident, powerful father she knew crumble into a pale, trembling wreck. "Daddy," she asked, her voice small. "Is everything okay?" He looked at his daughter, the supposed reason for his disgusting behavior. He had wrapped his prejudice in the noble cloak of fatherly protection, and in doing so had failed her more profoundly than he ever could have imagined. He had not protected her from the world. He had shown her the very worst of it, flowing directly from him. "No, sweetie," he said, the words catching in his throat as the full, crushing weight of reality settled upon him. Everything is not okay. He had to get them back to the ticket counter. He had to book a flight home, a flight of shame, back to a life that had just been dismantled. As he took Lily's hand and began the long, humiliating walk back through the terminal, he felt the vibration of his phone again. It was a news alert from a major media outlet. The headline, accompanied by a grainy, zoomed-in photo of him arguing with the flight attendant, read, "Financial executive's racist tirade against child on flight goes viral." sparks outrage. The story was already out. The firestorm had begun. The flight back to Chicago was a silent, suffocating ordeal. But the true reckoning awaited him behind his own front door. Robert walked into the pristine foyer of his home to find his wife, Catherine, standing like a statue carved from ice. Her face was pale, her eyes blazing with a sleepless fury. In her hand, her phone glowed, playing the viral video of his tirade on a silent, damning loop. "The news vans are at the end of the street," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Our friends have been calling all night. The school principal called. They all want to know if the monster in this video is the man we know. Is it Robert? Catherine, it was a mistake. It got out of control." He stammered the words, feeling pathetic and hollow. "I lost my job. Sterling fired me before we even landed." He thought the confession might earn him a sliver of pity. Instead, she laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that cut him to the core. "Your job? You think this is about your job? You humiliated a child in front of a plane full of people. You branded your own daughter with your ugliness. That video will be attached to our name forever. It will follow Lily to school, to college, to her own career. You didn't just lose a job, Robert. You torched our lives for a seat on an airplane." A small voice cut through the tension. "Daddy." Lily stood in the doorway, her school trip backpack still slung over her shoulder. She looked small and lost in the middle of the wreckage her father had created. She walked toward him, her expression not one of confusion, but of profound, heartbreaking seriousness. She looked up at him, her blue eyes searching his. "Why didn't you like that boy?" she asked, her voice clear and steady. He was quiet. "He didn't do anything wrong. But you were so mean to him. You made him sad. You made me sad too." "Why?" The simple, honest question was a blow more devastating than any corporate firing or public shaming. It demanded a truth he had never been forced to confront. Before this small, innocent judge, all his excuses about safety and concern crumbled into dust, revealing the rotten foundation beneath. He had no answer. There was no good reason, only an ancient, ugly hate that he had allowed to poison everything he claimed to love. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. In his silence, Catherine's face hardened with decision. "I want you to pack a bag and go to a hotel," she said, her voice final. "I can't have this in our house. Lily can't have this. You need to leave." Numbly, he did as he was told. He had lost his career, his status, and the respect of his wife. But as he walked out of his home, the heaviest loss was the look in his daughter's eyes. He hadn't just made a scene on a plane. He had taught his child a lesson in cruelty and revealed himself as a man she could no longer admire. The karma was not the loss of his livelihood. It was the crushing silence of his own home and the knowledge that he was the sole architect of his own destruction. Robert Harrison's story is a stark and powerful reminder that the choices we make, especially those fueled by prejudice, have consequences that ripple far beyond the initial moment. He didn't just lose a business deal, he lost his moral compass and shattered his family's peace. Marcus Vance, on the other hand, showed us the immense power of dignity. He didn't need to scream or shout. His quiet integrity and decisive action spoke volumes, proving that true strength lies not in intimidation but in character. This event on Flight 1138 became a painful public lesson in a classroom at 35,000 feet. If this story resonated with you and served as a reminder that every action has a reaction, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with others to spread the message that respect and empathy should always be our co-pilots in the journey of life. And of course, if you want to hear more true stories of drama karma and life-altering consequences, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. What would you have done if you were a passenger on that flight? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one,